Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us this beautiful Monday morning. Weather's great. We are excited to be presenting this information to you. We put together a great presentation about the most common questions that we are getting from our clients, from our investors, from just generally the public in a whole about what's going on with the stock market, what's going on with the economy, and just what's going on with society during this uncertain and unsettling time. We've prepped this presentation with questions that we've received beforehand, but please, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if there's a question that's on your mind, do not hesitate to use the chat feature, shoot the question in, and if it's something that we've already answered, no harm, no foul. And if not, it's great. We can spread even more knowledge to our audience, and that's exactly what we're looking to do this morning. As we mentioned earlier, I'm Devon Barrett. I'm an associate advisor going on 6 fantastic years at Francis Financial, and I have the honor and privilege of presenting alongside my colleague, Natalie Colley, this morning.
Wow, that was a very good introduction. Thank you so much. As Vaughn said, my name is Natalie Colley. I'm an associate advisor as well, and I have been at Francis Financial almost as long, not quite, 5.5 years, a little over 5.5 years at this point. Wonderful, wonderful years. And as Devon mentioned, we're definitely open for more questions. Go ahead and use the chat box feature. We are keeping tabs on that, and we'll make sure to circle back to those by the end of the presentation if anything comes up for you. But in terms of what we have to cover today, these are the most commonly asked questions that we are getting from clients. And frankly, Devon, for us, it's really just been, this is crazy. What are you guys' thoughts on what's going on? In the beginning, it was the market just did terribly. March was a really, really scary month for investors, ourselves included. There seemed to be a market free fall. The S&P 500 was down 30% as of the middle of March. That was what now we know was the bottom so far this year. And so we were getting very specific questions about the stimulus program, and our clients were losing their jobs, and it looked like the whole world was falling apart. And to be honest, it kind of still looks like the whole world is falling apart for many, many reasons. But for some reason, the market doesn't seem to be reflecting what's going on in the actual world at the moment. And the S&P 500, as of Friday, was down only about 5%. And what is most bizarre about this is, if you think about in March, the market had already slid back about 5% already, just on coronavirus fears going on throughout the world. Not necessarily it being in the U.S. just yet, but just in the world, coronavirus fears. If you had told the average investor that, hey, unemployment is going to go from 4% to 15%, we're going to have 40 million people file in the next 2.5 months, how do you think the market's going to do? They would have, any normal person would have said the market is going to go down 50%. We were hearing, you and I were hearing, right? This is going to be way worse than 2008, 2009. That's what we were hearing. And instead, what we're seeing is, as of close of market Friday, the market was pretty much back at where it was when unemployment was 4%. How do you make sense of that? Right.
And Nelly, you made some great points there, especially about the end of March, that, it's at the end of March, that March 23rd low, everyone's hair was on fire. It seemed like, there was just no end in sight to the free fall. And then now, as you mentioned, we're at a point where it looks like a lot of these losses have just been erased, and we can't put our finger on why. Are we out of the woods? Can't say. You know what I mean? Right now, a lot of the strong performance that we're seeing, there's a lot of factors playing into that. One is speculation. The market is built on people trying to predict what is going to happen in the future. That is really what we saw in March, right? The impact of the virus hadn't hit the economy just yet, but the market had fallen drastically because people were anticipating how the virus would impact the economy. So that's why we saw the free fall. So one explanation for the performance that we could be seeing is that investors may be saying, all right, you know what, this isn't quite as bad as what we priced in. So maybe let's pull it back a little bit. that could be one explanation. But then to that point, it's always speculation. That's why you can never be so sure if we're out of the woods. You know, the ups and downs and the volatility in the market will probably still be there because, you know, the virus is still with us. We don't have a vaccine. Businesses are starting to open up, especially across the country, across the globe, but we're still kind of in that slow ramp up phase. So as we're getting our footing, the choppiness is going to be there, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think you hit on it, which is that the market is really forward looking and it's a voting machine. It's not talking about what happened in the past. It's not even necessarily talking about what's happening today. It's looking forward. And
right.
To that point, you know, when we were starting to talk about this back in March, we were talking about stimulus efforts and the success of the recovery in this crisis was going to be very dependent on the government's ability to float the economy, to float these 40 million people who are not able to work right now. And from looking at the last stimulus bill, I think that extra $600 per week that people are getting on unemployment, that was really crucial to helping people kind of stay afloat. That goes through the end of July. So I think that was successful, maybe even more successful than the stimulus checks, at least for people where we live, right, New York City. And then the talks of the vaccine possibility coming out, it looks like we have some good options in the pipeline. And so the market is looking, ahead. I don't know how far ahead, but the market is looking ahead and it's trying to be really optimistic. Maybe the good weather in New York has something to do with that, but I agree that if we get some more news that maybe signals a vaccine is not as close as the market is predicting, or if we reach the end of July and a ton of people are still unemployed, and then we start to see the compound effects of that unemployment and there's no more stimulus, we could be in real trouble. Right. In this market.
Something really poignant that you mentioned that I want to quickly touch on was the federal government, the Federal Reserve, that you know, they've really dedicated themselves to keeping the economy afloat during this uncertain time. And you know, there is a lot to be said about current leadership, and I'm not going to get into that this morning. But as far as the Federal Reserve, we need to shine a light on that as just far as their efforts. You know, this pandemic is definitely is the word that we're using and hearing the most is unprecedented, right? It just feels like something we've never seen before. But at the same time, the Federal Reserve's response is also unprecedented. It's just the amount of dedication of stimulus that they're willing to pump into the economy, the use of interest rates, and that's something we'll touch on later in the presentation. But that being said, it is reassuring to see that the government has the economic government has their finger on the pulse of what's going on and saying, you know what, we'll do what needs to be done to get Americans through this tough time.
Yeah, and over the weekend I was reading about Mitch McConnell's statements about maybe another round of stimulus, and he seems to be pretty set that they will not extend that extra $600 per week. And he said something that did stick out to me. He said, you know, the point of unemployment is not to incentivize people to stay home. And I get it. Actually, that is true. That's why with disability insurance, you're not able to cover 100% of your paycheck, because then, you know, it's kind of nice to stay home and get your full paycheck. But in this particular situation, this event, wasn't that a little bit of the point of the stimulus or of the unemployment check was, hey, people, we are, as your government, are telling you to stay home for health reasons. And so here is enough money to help bridge that gap for you. And so I think that was sort of important up until this point. I agree, maybe not as important after the end of July, once hopefully the economies start opening up again.
Right.
And we'll see, you know, there are a lot of unusual things that we can kind of talk about. I'll move slides. I know you and I have had a lot of discussions about what's going on, and there are a lot of interesting things going on but right now. And one of those is that investors seem to be rushing into the stock market, which is the exact opposite of what we typically see during a market downturn like this.
Right,
And
right.
Talk about that.
Yeah, it's a good point, Natalie, and it's something interesting to see. I think personally, I think part of it is just that we're not too far removed from the last great economic kerfuffle, for lack of a better term, in the sense that '08 was, not that long ago. Investors remember, investors still, we saw the recovery and they still felt the effects. So a lot of investors remember how they handled '08, how it felt at the time that, it was full-blown panic mode in the moment, but the market quickly recovered, relatively speaking. And, within 2 years, market had completely erased all those sharp gains that we saw in '08 to '09 and was in positive territory. So personally, I think investors remember that. And they say, you know what? I know that '08 was devastating, but I stayed the course and it worked out for me last time. And I'm thinking that's what hopefully investors are thinking this time, that, you know what? I know it's going to be rough and I know we're going to be in for some choppy waters now, but eventually down the line we'll be in for some smooth sailing. So let me reinforce my boat. I have some cash sitting on the sideline that's not doing anything for me. Let's get it into the market, get it growing for the long term. And I think that's really the best way to navigate this. Now we talk about this at length. I think we have at least a couple of conversations a week about just staying the course. And that's really the best thing. I know it's tough, but it's really the best thing that you can do if you don't need this money in the short term. Because if you're locked in for the market for the long run, you're kind of just along for the ride. Because let's look at March. You saw that drop of 30%. If you panicked and pulled out, well, you missed out on some really strong gains. And not to say that we're back in positive territory for the long run, but that just goes to show you how quickly the market can swing. So timing the market is really a foolhardy game. We're on record saying that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do wonder if it's really investors who are saying, okay, I'm going to ride this one out. I mean, I do think that that's actually a huge percentage of investors right now are saying, I'm going to ride it out. And of course, today, here we are, the S&P 500 is down only 5%, but that's a whole lot better than it was in March. And so it doesn't feel quite as painful as it did, just 2 short months ago. But I wonder if a lot or some of this, at the very least, some of this new investment money going into the market right now is are investors who are trying to jump in now, who have been waiting for this opportunity for years. And I wanted to touch on that because when we were in March and the market was down 30%, we did get some people reaching out saying, hey, I have this chunk of money sitting aside. I think now is the buying opportunity I've been waiting for. And I took a peek at the just general S&P 500, which of course we both know that's not anybody's portfolio, but we all tend to use it as some benchmark measurement. And I took a peek, and even, during the weeks that we were hearing this from people, the S&P 500 was only back to about, 2018 levels. It wasn't, it wasn't back to 2010, 2009. So if you think about people who are saving up a really big lump sum to get it invested into the market at the right time, think about if they had just invested it over the course of those years. They would have been at the very least at the same point, or maybe not, maybe even a little bit better, because what ended up happening in these couple of situations was more often than not, these people decided not to invest that extra lump sum because they were convinced that the market would get worse, because how could it possibly not get worse? And so now I fear that there is still a bunch of cash sitting aside for some people who are waiting for another buying opportunity. And that just goes back to, again, what you said, which is staying invested is the most important. That includes not stockpiling cash on the sidelines if you don't need it for your emergency reserve. And
right.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off. I completely agree. I got so excited how much I agree. That, waiting for that Goldilocks moment where this is the moment. This is just like that light bulb is not going to come over your head typically to alert you that this is the moment. So trying to time it out, you really, and most of the time, just end up shooting yourself in the foot. So yeah, to that point, it's really important to get it in. If you don't have a short-term goal and your horizon is 10, 15 plus years, there's no reason to be waiting for that. Get that money to work for you. We know that, right now there's a lot of debate. Like if you read any kind of literature about is the stock market overvalued or undervalued, it really depends on what publication you're reading. Because some will say it's overvalued, some will say it's undervalued. So right now, the smart money is not even really sure what direction we're going in. So that, save yourself that headache of trying to be this guru that knows exactly where we're going with the crystal ball and get it in, get the money in and let it grow for you. As we see this infographic that we have on the screen, this is the recovery of the stock market based on a 60-40 portfolio or a balanced portfolio. So 60% stock, 40% bonds following a recession or a market downturn. So what we see here are a few things. Well, one, it seems like October and September are just terrible months to be invested. That's when things really hit the fan here. But side note, you can see that, when we have that market dip within, in some cases after 1 year, in many of these, the market is back. Well, actually in all of these, except for September 2001, which was the tech bubble burst, the market is back in positive territory. The 60-40 portfolio is back in positive territory. And if you go out after, 5 years in that teal bar, we are seeing some really strong gains. So that goes to say, again, that point about if you don't have that short-term goal, get the money invested. This time next year, can't say for sure that it'll have grown, but history shows, that 5 years from now, it's a safe bet that you would have seen some really great gains.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the flip side is waiting, even if you are by chance or because you're just brilliant, even if you do get in at the absolute bottom of the market, it doesn't make as big of an impact as you would think. Unless we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, a large percentage of your portfolio, which I would certainly not feel comfortable trying to time something like this with a big lump sum of my money. So a great anecdotal, evidence of this is I just happened to pay off my student loans and be in the position where I could start fully contributing to my 401k in March of 2009. So great, right? Woo! Lucky me. And unfortunately, fortunately, whatever, I look back at my historic gains over this period of time, and I had expected, I'm not going to lie, to have really awesome gains because of that fabulous timing. It hasn't made that big of a difference. And the reason is, what are we talking about? $1,000 a month or something that you're contributing to your 401k, which is absolutely a very good amount of savings, but it's not $500,000 where you're going to get that 40%, 50% growth, 100% growth, whatever.
Right.
So my $1,000 turned to $2,000 for a short period of time, which is great. But overall, my returns are averaging what I would expect, right, over the long term. So it doesn't make that big of a difference that you would think.
Right. But on the flip side, it does make a big difference missing out on those really positive days. There are studies that show, right, that if, the market tends to move in these really big chunks, that if you miss out on a handful of the most positive days over a really long time horizon, you really cut into your returns. This is just something that, we're coming up in conversation right now, so I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I know that, over a period of like 10 years, if you miss just the best, I think it's 2 months in that 10-year frame, you take like the growth of $10,000 is like become almost negative at that point, just because you've missed the best days. So that's the flip side of timing the market that no one really talks about. That you may miss out on the pain points of the lows, but if you miss out on the highs, you've really set yourself back. So that's something to always be careful of.
Yeah, nobody is talking to their neighbor and hearing their neighbor say, "Hey, I missed out on that minus 10% day, but I also missed out on that positive 20% day, so tell me."
That's not golf course conversation, I don't think. I think that's bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more just interesting tidbit I wanted to share about the market in general right now. We're big on diversifying your portfolio. We're big in our own portfolios on diversification. You never know what's going to come out on top. And that doesn't change, even if it looks like it's changed in the short term. And the most dangerous four words an investor can ever use are "this time is different." And I think we're seeing a little bit of that investor mentality right now. There's the danger out there, and that's because think of the last 10 years, U.S. large company growth stocks, the FANGs, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, Netflix, they've just been doing phenomenally well. And what we've seen this year is if you skim those largest, most expensive stocks off the market, they're up about 9% year to date, this collection of companies. And if you look at the cheapest companies in the S&P 500, those are down pretty significantly. Those value stocks, those blue chip type companies, those are down about 21% year to date. So we're still seeing this really big lean into U.S. large company growth stocks. But the danger here for investors is to think that that's the way it's always going to be and that the paradigm is different. But I think it's worth stating that we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. And that's why we need to be exposed to all industries. We don't know what this recovery is going to look like. Some industries are going to be much harder hit than others. Some countries much harder hit than others. And that's why we need diversification across everything. You really have to span out beyond the present day, because in the short term, the market can be wrong.
Right. And to that, just to add to that, we're at the mercy of the news cycle right now as investors. And to the point of diversification, you just never know when a piece of negative news is going to impact a specific company. So if you expose yourself too much to that company, you are more so at the mercy of the news. I know there are some companies right now that are knocking it out of the park and it looks like a no-brainer, like the Amazons and Johnson & Johnson or companies like that. But you never know what's going to happen around the corner. It's not inconceivable to see a news headline that outbreak of coronavirus at an Amazon packing plant. That's going to have an impact on the stock price. Or if all of a sudden the CDC comes out and says, Clorox wipes really don't do anything. They're not killing the virus like we thought they were. That's going to have an impact on the stock price. So you just never know when some piece of news is going to come out and really impact the company. So you never want to put too many eggs in one basket, because right now markets are moving quickly based on what we're seeing on the headlines.
Yeah, and you don't, to that point also, you don't know, you were giving examples of this current crisis, which now we're aware that this can happen, but who could have predicted this? We've had SARS, we've had swine flu. I was in Mexico during swine flu. It didn't seem like that big of a deal on a personal level like this obviously feels. So who could have predicted this? And we always talk about people's plans, and we say, we planned in your plan for something like this. And I got one client say, really, you planned for a pandemic that was going to shut down the U.S. economy for 3 months? And that's not the point.
Quite.
The point is you plan for the unexpected, and this crisis has benefited large tech companies, which were already doing well. But the next crisis could result in an outage of internet across the world for months. And then it would be the exact reverse. We would have to connect face to face. We would have to change our lives in a totally different way. And it's easy to see how that would happen now, given how quickly this crisis changed the way that we're living and working and functioning.
100%.
So, all right. Let's get into some of the topics. We are also getting some questions from clients who want to know, what are some things that I can be focusing on during this pandemic when we're at home? And not all of us have a ton of extra time at home, but one of those items is estate planning. And, this is something that hits home for me a little bit. My husband and I are, as you know, Devon, we are expecting our first baby in September. And so we've never had to do estate planning before. Now we're going to have to do it. And I have to say that it has brought it has made me a little bit aware of why clients maybe want to put this on the back burner. It's just something that is tough to get around to and to spend a couple $1,000s on when it seems like you should be saving for diapers and daycare and that sort of thing. And so, you know, I wanted to share a little bit, just one way I'm trying to reframe it in my mind, which is just that it's like another bill that you have to take care of, just like the delivery fee at the hospital. It's just one of those things you got to take care of before the kid comes. New responsibilities, got to make sure to get that done. Now that's my personal situation. I don't know that a ton of people are in that at this moment, but we have been hearing from a lot of estate planning attorneys that people are rushing to get this in place because of dire needs and what's going on with the health impact right now. And at the very least, the healthcare proxy, who's going to be able to make those decisions for you when you're in the hospital and, God forbid, unable to make those decisions for yourself. Durable power of attorney, who will be able to manage your finances if you're incapacitated. And we've seen from this pandemic that it can happen really, really quickly. So making sure that these documents are up to date is more important now than ever, I think. And another topic, Devon, that you were telling me about that I thought was a good point was if you're in the midst of a divorce.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And now that just really quickly, do you mind putting this into full screen, the presentation? But yeah, that's it.
Not full screen.
If it is, maybe it's my screen. It looks a little small, but you know.
Oh, here, let me.
Minutes. We're in the groove now. Don't let me throw us off. But there we go.
Could I? Oh, sorry about that.
No worries. So, yes, to that point, you know, if you're in the midst of a divorce, it's likely that your spouse has been the one who's been designated to make the decisions on your behalf for medical reasons, or if they may be, you know, the person that's, you know, bequeathed everything in your will. And that was fine for the points of the marriage. But now that you guys are at the midst of unwinding the relationship, is that still the person you want to be making medical decisions for you? Is that still the person that you want everything to go to? Probably not. So, you know, while courts right now were closed for quite some time, they're starting to open up. So divorces have, you know, kind of been put on pause. This is a great time to say, you know what, all right, we've got a minute to come up for air on the divorce process. Let me switch gears and look at estate planning. And then now to your point, you know, you have that wonderful, wonderful catalyst of you're expecting a child. Also, you know, there's a lot of catalysts right now. Unfortunately, coronavirus has been devastating on our society. You know, in the U.S. alone, we're creeping up over 100,000 deaths. So unfortunately, many people know someone or have been personally impacted by the effects of COVID-19. So that, unfortunately, is triggering people to say, you know what, I need to get my documents in order just in case. So, you know, better late than never. And it's, you know, why put off to tomorrow what you can do today? Really get cracking on that estate planning if you can.
Right. And, you know, obviously we have connections to fabulous estate planning attorneys who work at all different levels and who offer different services. So if anybody is listening to this and thinks, yeah, this is something that I need to jump on, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to connect you with somebody that we trust.
Excellent. Yep. Great point. Great point. And another thing, you know, what could you be doing during this time? We talked about it earlier with the federal stimulus, but one thing that's really kind of on the back burner almost at this point is where interest rates are. Interest rates were already at a really low point at this time, you know, last year. We're like, well, this is as low as we're going to go. You know, we can only go up from here. And then lo and behold, coronavirus hit, and then the Federal Reserve said, okay, well, let's take a step back. We may need to cut interest rates a bit more and stimulate the economy. And their thought process there is that if you cut interest rates, you're making money cheap. And if people are more willing to borrow, they're more willing to re-stimulate the economy by putting that borrowed money, recirculating it back into the economy. It's a great thought process, and it benefits the consumer in a few ways, one of which is it can create some really great opportunities to save money by refinancing. I will say it's not as much of a no-brainer as you may think it is. You may see, you know, your mortgage rate is 4.5, you can get 3.5 now. done deal. I'm going to do it. You know, take stock of your situation because there are fees and costs associated with refinancing. So you know, you really want to make sure it makes sense for you in the sense that you can recover some of those costs over the time as far as your savings. If you're going to move right away, you're going to sell the home, or if there's only a few years left on the mortgage, it may not make sense. But if you're in a situation where your rate is going to be cut drastically and you are in your dream home, you're there for the long haul, yeah, it definitely makes sense to refinance and save yourself some money on a monthly basis. Some of it is student loans. Student loans is probably a little bit easier because they're not going anywhere. You're not moving away from your student loans. I could attest to that. I went to NYU. They've saddled me with a ton of debt. Thank you, NYU. And I personally refinanced my student loans since this pandemic has begun. It was an opportunity for me to get my rates to a low level that, you know, I'm not aggressively paying them down because their interest rates are really low right now. So, you know, my money can be better. It can better serve me elsewhere because I've gotten my student loan rates to a low level. And that's something that it really opens up opportunity for you, that if, you know, you're someone who you don't, because there's a difference between values, right? If some people just don't want to see debt on their balance sheet, and I completely get that. But if that's not you, if you don't mind seeing a little debt on the balance sheet and you get your rates low enough, now you've got an opportunity to do other things with your money because it could be growing more than it would be your interest rates, or, you know, more interest than you'd be paying. So there's an opportunity for a little bit of arbitrage there. Similarly with savings accounts, I know, Natalie, you love savings accounts, you love sub-savings accounts, it's your favorite thing.
I do.
So there's a lot of opportunity right now is to just really make sure your money's in a place that it's getting the best rate for you. Rates are changing. The rate that banks are paying are changing like on a weekly basis. I feel like I get an email from my money is at Marcus. So Marcus Savings, the Goldman Sachs bank. I feel like I get an email every week from them that's like, oh, new rate, new rate, new rate. So it's really hard to stay on top of it, but there are a bunch of great websites. Sometimes you can even search high yield savings rate, and it will tell you a couple of different banks and what they're offering. So it's a great way to make sure that, you know, if you're at a certain bank, I don't want to say any bank, and you're getting 0.5%, and you can be getting 1.5 somewhere else, you know, if it's not too cumbersome, that to me, I would take advantage of that.
Mhm. Yeah, and at the very least, if you're just with your general checking account and that's where you have your emergency fund, get it out of there, put it in a high yield online account. It'll take a couple days to transfer to and from that emergency fund and back to your checking account. But I mean, you're talking an easy, you know, few $1,000 each year, not up to 10,000 per year, that you would be gaining from putting it in a high yield account for yourself. And what we've been seeing are two different approaches to the refinancing that you were talking about, Devon. Is one is for people who have lost their job temporarily. They are looking for ways to free up more cash flow. It could make a lot of sense, particularly because a lot of people just refinanced a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, and still their rates are in the 4s. And for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, we're seeing about like 3.7 around there. So not a huge drop, but it can be big enough to make sense for you if you are really staying in that home for a long period of time and really looking at ways to reduce your monthly overhead. That could make sense. And the flip side is if you have a secure job and you are really looking to, or you have the opportunity to pay down your mortgage faster, switching from a 30-year to a 15-year mortgage, that can be huge in the amount of interest saved over the life of that loan, because for 15-year mortgages, we're seeing rates of 2.9 even. So that can make a lot of sense. We've been running a lot of numbers for our clients recently.
Yep.
All right. We made it to the questions section, and I haven't been keeping tabs on the chat since I've been sharing my screen, but I trust
I have. We haven't received any questions, and I'm just going to chalk that up to the fantastic job we've done in covering the breadth of all of this information this morning. But that could just be my optimism.
No, I think, it's a beautiful sunny day. We're heading into summer. Things are looking up. I like the optimism. And anyone watching knows where to reach us. We are always available for all of our clients. Phone call. Personally, that's been my favorite part of this sort of lockdown period, is I feel like I've been connecting with clients even more over phone, and that's been really fulfilling and nice to just have out of meetings, sort of conversations with people. That's been really nice. So feel free to reach out. I see we may have one more. Oh.
We have a question. So it's, how often do you recommend checking your portfolio? Every day can make one crazy. Absolutely. Mental health is key, and that's actually probably where we're going to end this presentation. Good segue into that. I wouldn't recommend checking your portfolio any more than once a month. Natalie, I would love to get your thoughts on this as well. Especially if you're not using this money for anything, if you were taking it for living expenses, that's one thing, but you're typically taking it in small chunks relative to the whole portfolio. The piece that you're taking out to cover your living expenses is a really small portion, relatively speaking. So, that piece, it's probably set, especially if you're working with someone who has a plan in place for you. So, the ups and downs, the swings, it's not going to do you any favors. On a good day, it's shown that humans, we flee pain more than we enjoy pleasure. So, you may see a day where it's up 2%, but if you see a day where it's down 2%, more likely than not, it's going to weigh more heavily on you, seeing that down day. So I would really say, it's great to stay on top of your statements. Your statements are issued monthly. If you want, open your statement, see your balances, see what's going on in your account. But I wouldn't recommend going in and checking any more frequently than that. It's just, you're going to drive yourself insane.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, that is one of the, hedge funds and private equity, we don't typically talk about this because we don't believe that it's a wise investment for a vast majority of people for various reasons. But one of the small benefits in terms of investor behavior to those kinds of investments is that they're black boxes. You can't tell what you are invested in. You can't see your returns on a day-to-day basis. You can't simply log in and see that you're up or down any single day for a lot of these investment types. And that can really, really help investor behavior during volatile years like what we're seeing right now. And then, and Devon, you have more experience than I do in that area.
That's a great point, and I actually forget that. It's, because we've been here for so long and we do such a great job on keeping clients updated and staying up to date and showing figures, I forget that, I did work at a hedge fund before, many moons ago. And yeah, it's, you get your fact sheet that shows you what the general performance was, quarterly, and that's it. There's no logging in and seeing typically what the performance was day to day. That's just not, and, I think investors almost take that for granted. Like that can be the norm. So, which is a positive way to look at it. Just don't drive yourself crazy. The market's going to do what it's going to do. And if you're in for the ride, just buckle up.
Yep. And I'm so happy that we got that question about self-care because I must admit, I forgot that we had one extra slide to share with everybody. More important than ever at this point in time, of course, for coronavirus, but then also there's a lot going on in the world right now, and it's interesting to get together and only talk about the market and how it's doing without acknowledging to the broader social events that are going on in our country at the moment. It's stressful for all of us, and it's scary, and there are a lot of things to be upset about at the moment, I think. And so it's just really important to find your center, however you can do that. We're trying to help however we can on our end, hosting weekly workouts. It's a lovely way to come together as a community. I've been doing them pretty consistently every Thursday at 5:30. We alternate between yoga. So it's yoga this week, this Thursday at 5:30. And then next week will be personal training, more of a HIIT kind of cardio, get you sweating type workout. And we'd love for everyone to join us. We are also hosting some meditations for a short period of time, and meditation is also a great way to kind of connect and just breathe and separate yourself from the news.
That's a great point, Natalie. And it's, now, I love that you said find your center, because right now, socially, economically, it seems like things are topsy-turvy. So finding a point to really ground yourself is important. not even just checking the news, but also checking. Oh, my light went out. They're telling me to wrap it up, I guess. But
Good.
not only not checking your portfolio, but the news. You want to stay informed. You want to stay abreast of what's going on in the world and how you can make a change if that's something that is important to you. But there's a fine line between staying informed and then fatiguing yourself. I found that this weekend, just turning on the news or social media, there's just so much going on that you want to take it in to an extent. Find some time to really unplug yourself, just to prevent that news fatigue, that news cycle fatigue, and what could really draw you down.
Yep. Well said. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. And again, thank you everyone for joining and taking your time to drink your coffee or your tea while listening to us chat about the market and recent events this morning. We really appreciate you. And Devon, this has been fun. Let's do it again sometime.
Anytime.